Your watercolor palette deserves a perfect blue. But with so many options, it can be hard to choose. Some appear warm, almost violet, others more green, some blues are smooth, and others are creamy and full of texture. So how do you decide which blue is best? In this video, I will share 12 essential watercolor blues, and we're going way deeper than basic swatching out. I'm going to demonstrate how you can use them in real paintings, how you can mix them into gorgeous greens, purples, and neutrals, and we will also talk about the 4 key traits that matter most for each watercolor pigment you choose: light fastness, transparency, staining, and granulation, meaning whether or not each particular blue color will give you lots of texture. By the end, you'll know exactly which blues fit your style and how to use them with confidence. Let's start with my number 1 most used blue, called Phthalo Blue Green Shade. Depending on the brand, you might see it labeled as marine blue, oriental blue, or intense blue. And what I love about it is that, well, it's definitely one of the most intense, striking blues you can find, with excellent light fastness, meaning it will not fade over time. It's a highly staining color, which means that once it dries, you can't lift it off the paper. This makes it perfect for glazing techniques, since each layer will stay put while you build up color. I use it for flower petals, water scenes, beautiful accents on bird feathers, or even holiday compositions. And of course, most often as a shadow color, especially on white subjects. It's ideal for smooth blue underpainting or glazing, like here, for example, where I'm adding a subtle blue glow on this butterfly. If it feels too vivid for your style, it's still excellent as a primary blue for mixing secondary colors. For example, when I combine it with quinacridone magenta, it creates a stunning, vivid purple, and this would be great for painting a variety of purple flowers. I love to build my phthalo blue in layers. Once the first wash is dry, I'll add another glaze to show you how dark you can go and really deepen the tone. It never feels heavy or muddy, and that's what watercolor is all about for me. Luminous transparency and vividness that can be layered again and again without losing the sense of light. My phthalo blue is from Core, and you can find it in other brands by looking for code PB15 version 3, meaning Pigment Blue 15 version 3. And if you want a warmer, more natural and less vivid version, you can also find this phthalo blue as a red shade variation. And here I'm using another tube from Core, once again displaying beautiful transparency, no visible texture, and you can layer it over and over again, just like the green variation, but for a much more natural look. As an example, here I'm using it on the plums, adding some magenta accents. And by the way, this plum composition will be our August tutorial on Patreon, so make sure to check it out if you love working with blues and you love painting fruit. And if you love mixing watercolors, you can definitely use this blue as a primary color. When paired with cadmium yellow medium hue, for example, it produces a fresh, transparent green, perfect for spring and summer landscapes. I absolutely love using phthalo blues for my backgrounds because of the excellent transparency and staining quality of these pigments. You can layer them over and over, creating gorgeous atmospheric effects. And here's what it looks like on my swatch when I apply another layer. Beautiful range of values, meaning lights and darks, all with a clean, even finish and no granulation. I personally prefer the smooth look for blues, reserving more textured and granulating effects for my greens, but you might choose the opposite depending on the mood you want to create. So let's switch gears for a moment and look at granulating blue, and you will see just how different the same shade of watercolor can be and how much it can affect your work. Here is Ultramarine Blue, Pigment Blue 29. Mine is from Daniel Smith. This blue was voted number 1 favorite blue by my Instagram subscribers, and it's easy to see why. It's a stunning color, quite staining, transparent, and very light fast. But keep in mind, it's highly granulating, unlike the first 2 blues that I swatched. What I mean by that is This ultramarine produces lots of visible speckles, especially on textured cold-pressed paper I'm using here. This granulation carries into any mix, as you will see when I combine it with burnt sienna, a classic pairing that will give you a range of warm to cool textured grays. This mix is perfect for natural fur, landscapes, and urban sketching, and it's a staple in many artists' palettes. Personally, I've used ultramarine in pieces like my peacock study, where the texture works beautifully, but I rarely have it on my palette these days because I dislike this granulation and prefer smooth, transparent blues for my layering technique. This color is undeniably beautiful, that said, and I might get some very strong disagreement here in the comments, but I'll say it anyway. I've always been puzzled by how often ultramarine is included as the only blue in beginner watercolor sets. Here's what I mean. This strong granulation has a completely different feel from smooth pigments and can make layering trickier, which I think can complicate the learning process for beginners. At least it did for me many years ago. This is, of course, just my opinion. If you love granulation but want a slightly warmer, violet-leaning version of ultramarine, check out French ultramarine. Both are pigment blue 29, but French ultramarines have larger particles. They look much warmer and tend to granulate even more. And keep in mind that regular ultramarine will generally mix cleaner, brighter greens, so the choice depends on your style. Let me know in comments below which one you prefer. And if you love the color but not the texture, then stick around. I'll show you a gorgeous non-granulating ultramarine alternative that I recently discovered, and I'm gonna swatch it all the way at the end. The next 4 blue pigments I'm going to show you are very common and very popular, but I rarely reach for them in my own work. It's purely a stylistic choice, and you'll probably recognize most of them, maybe even have them on your palette already. Let's start with Cobalt Blue, PB28. This is what's called a true spectrum blue. It doesn't lean toward green or purple, making it an excellent primary mixing blue. It's beloved by many artists, especially for landscapes and skies. It mixes beautifully into soft grays, neutralizes oranges and browns, and creates fresh, natural greens when paired with yellow, like I'm doing here. It's also highly light fast, so it resists fading over time. One thing to note, Cobalt Blue is very granulating, which is why I don't use it often. Personally, I prefer smoother blues without visible texture. But many artists love this quality. It's also extremely liftable, so you can remove it from paper easily with tissue or damp, flat brush. Perfect for creating clouds or soft edge effects. And if you're looking for a blue that's also granulating and liftable, but leans more towards green, consider Cerulean Blue. Mine is Cerulean Red shade from Winsor & Newton. This one has a very strong granulation. Those heavy pigment particles settle visibly onto paper. It's also quite opaque, so it can mute or cover underlying layers. To me, this works similar to gouache, so I stay away from cerulean, but it's very, very popular because of its beautiful shade. It's not my personal preference, since I like my blues light and transparent, and I use a lot of thin glazes in my work, but it's undeniably beautiful. If you want a softer, more semi-transparent version, try Cerulean Blue from Daniel Smith. Our next blue is really something special. A gorgeous shade, very popular with decorative and folk artists, but it does come with a bit of a baggage, so let me explain. This is called Cobalt Teal, mine is from Core. It's a unique, semi-staining, green-leaning blue that's very easy to lift, just like the previous 2 pigments I showed you, and it's quite granulating. What makes it stand out for me is its semi-opaque quality. In multiple layers, it can easily cover the colors beneath, which makes it less ideal for traditional glazing. The paint itself feels quite creamy, almost like working with gouache. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. For example, in this plum study, I'm adding it right at the end as a small accent so it doesn't overpower the other colors. As a mixing primary, it really shines when creating granulating purples. Here I mixed it with magenta, and you can see the heavier teal particles settling onto the paper, producing a completely different texture compared to the smoother purple I made earlier with magenta and non-granulating phthalo blue. I mostly use teal for painting snow. It's fantastic for capturing those unique icy blue shadows on a sunny day, and occasionally in botanical work, always as an accent. Now, the baggage I mentioned, it's this heavy opacity and granulation that can easily lead to muddy mixes and loss of transparency in your washes. Of course, this is just my experience. To keep that luminous watercolor look, you'll want to dilute it significantly. And one important tip, avoid student-grade cobalt teals. They often bulk up the white filler pigment, which changes the way the color behaves entirely. Professional-grade teals without added white are far more versatile, and when used with plenty of water, they can be a stunning addition to your palette. This next pigment holds a very special place in my heart. This turquoise is also a phthalo color, like the first two we looked at, but technically it's a mix of phthalo blue green shade and another green pigment. My core version uses PG7, which is phthalo green blue shade, while Daniel Smith, for example, uses PG36. So slightly different hues across brands, but all are remarkably vivid and beautiful. I was actually planning to include this color in my video about my favorite greens, but when I asked my Instagram subscribers to name their favorite blues, so many of you mentioned it that I just couldn't leave it out. And it makes sense. It's a blue leaning green, intensely vibrant, highly staining, fully transparent, perfect for tropical foliage or that clear greenish blue seawater on a sunny day. It used to be a permanent resident on my palette. You might remember it from my yellow peony painting where I used it on the background, or the Scarlet Ibis composition, which is available as a real-time tutorial on Patreon. I still use it occasionally, mostly for tropical birds, but in recent years I've replaced it with something softer and less intense. Spoiler alert, it's aqua green from Winsor & Newton, which I will swatch out when we get to my watercolor greens series. So don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss it. What I really wanted to show you today is how beautiful phthalo turquoise is in mixes, especially with pyrrole orange, which it neutralizes. If you're after that perfect smooth neutral gray, especially for portraits, this combination is incredible. Artist Ali Kavanagh, apologies if I'm mispronouncing her last name, is known for her distinctive watercolor portrait style, and Core Watercolors actually released a set she curated featuring this particular pairing. The mix produces gorgeous non-granulating grays, ideal for soft shadows on cheeks and eyelids, also for backgrounds of course. I think it's also fantastic for urban sketching or anywhere you want a very smooth, even wash of neutral gray. I hope you can see that it's quite different from the textured grays we made earlier with granulating ultramarines. And now in the final round, I'll share my favorite dark and moody blues, and then just as promised, I'll swatch out that wonderful alternative to granulating ultramarine. Let's start with Prussian blue, the very first synthetic blue pigment discovered in the early 18th century. It was hugely popular for centuries, and if you've studied art history, you'll recognize it in one of the most famous paintings ever, Van Gogh's Starry Night. This color is highly staining, which means once it dries, it's very difficult to lift off paper. It's also very tinting, so a little goes a long way. The hue leans slightly toward green, which you may or may not love on its own. Personally, I rarely use it straight from the tube, but what I do love is how it works in a mix. And I couldn't wait to show you this gorgeous violet it creates when mixed with magenta. I think if you're into painting flowers, you will love this. The result is so beautiful, perfect for iris petals, certain rose varieties, also deep sunsets, or even darker skin tones. So Prussian blue is a fantastic mixing blue, and as a standalone, it's great for dramatic stormy skies or deep ocean water. Actually, for those subjects, I typically prefer the next color. It's called Indothrone blue. Pigment Blue 60, semi-opaque, highly staining, gorgeous dark blue, almost approaching black when fully saturated. It's probably close second to my #1 favorite phthalo blue, and I use it everywhere in my compositions, from delicate insect details like these dragonfly wings to dark but more natural looking shadows, also on bird feathers. You can see it looks very dark, but not as harsh as black. It gives me a good hint of color while helping me darken the subject in a very natural way. I just love the look and I highly recommend it, especially for dark backgrounds. I often use it to create a sense of contrast and bring out my lighter subjects without relying on the harshness of black pigment. And of course, you can try it as a mixing primary. Here's an example with cadmium yellow, medium hue, and it creates a beautiful warm green, perfect for summer landscapes. And finally, let's look at the darkest blue you can find. This is indigo. The version I'm using from Daniel Smith is a mix of Indothrone blue that I just showed you and lamp black, pigment black 6. Most modern brands offer their own indigo blends, all inspired by the original natural dye that's been used for centuries. These modern versions, though, are much more light fast. Indigo is really a staple on my palette. I use it instead of black in all my compositions, and I've said it many times before on my channel, pure black straight from the tube rarely looks natural and often creates muddy mixes. Indigo, on the other hand, gives you that deep contrast without the harshness, making it much more versatile. And I've shown you a few examples so far, like the clownfish and different birds. Here's a turkey, for example. But one of my favorite uses of indigo is mixing it directly on paper with vibrant phthalo blue-green shade that I showed you in the beginning. These two pigments mingle beautifully, creating depth and visual interest on dark shapes without making them look flat. And you can see that effect here in the bird feathers, very rich dynamic shadows and some vibrant highlights, all full of life. As promised, here's a non-granulating alternative to regular ultramarine. It's called Ultramarine Finest from Schmincke. It's the same beautiful shade, but with far less granulation. I'm swatching it here on cold pressed paper, so you'll see a few speckles settling into the cotton, but it's nothing compared to the strong texture of the classic ultramarine. It's made with that same pigment, PB29, but formulated to minimize granulation. If you enjoy working with portraits or want smoother blends while keeping that iconic ultramarine look, definitely give Ultramarine Finest a try. When mixed with burnt sienna to create a neutral gray, that granulation becomes even less noticeable. This has been one of my more recent discoveries, and I've been reaching for it whenever I want that classic ultramarine hue without the heavy texture. Like in my blue poppy painting using the X-ray technique, you can find the full process on my YouTube channel here. And I also love using it as a mixing blue in portraits, where it really shines for creating soft, natural shadows and skin tones. And if portraits are your thing, watch this video next, where I take you step by step through painting a watercolor portrait of a girl, including tips for mixing skin tones and mastering light and shadow on the face.